Hello, and welcome to the AgCulture Podcast, where we cultivate tomorrow by inspiring agripreneurs and ag innovators through real-life perspectives in agriculture. I'm Paul Windemuller, your host on this journey of exploration and growth. On today's episode, I had the pleasure of interviewing Sam Watson-Jones. Sam is a fourth-generation farmer in Shropshire, England, where they have an arable and poultry farm with his family. Sam was also the co-founder of Small Robot Company, which is an ag tech company based out of England, as well as a fellow 2024 Nuffield Scholar. Sam's Nuffield topic is his commitment to the future where artificial intelligence positively supports agriculture. Now, as many of my conversations I've had with Sam have done, this one went pretty long. We have a lot to talk about when we get together and discuss the future of agriculture. So I'm breaking this interview into two parts. So today's episode will be the conversation that we had more around Sam's journey and his mindset in his family farm business. And I'm sure you'll find some absolute gems of wisdom, as I have, in this discussion with Sam. Next week's episode, the second part of the interview, will focus more on the story of the Small Robot Company, which is a company that Sam helped found 7 years ago, and his insights into the world of ag tech startups. So sit back and enjoy the story of Sam Jones. Sam Watson-Jones, welcome to the AgCulture Podcast. It's so good to have you here today.
Great to be here, Paul. Thank you very much for inviting me.
I'm looking forward to our conversation today. You've got quite an exciting journey that you've been on in your career, and you are a fellow Nuffield Scholar. So for everyone listening in the audience, Sam and I met in Brazil in a pool having a beer together. And I think we probably talked for, 3 hours, the initial time that we talked?
Yeah, we had a lot to talk about. We did.
Common. Yeah. I really enjoyed that, and I look forward to having you on the podcast here today. So let's start off. You're in the UK. What part of the UK are you from?
We're in the Midlands, which, as the name suggests, is roughly in the middle, on the Welsh border, but in England. So for those who know their UK geography, so we're about 3.5 hours northwest of London, about an hour west of Birmingham, and about an hour south of Liverpool. So we're sort of in that on the west side of England, getting up towards the north, which is good. Good farming country, a real mix of things here. Quite a lot of crops grown, and lots of dairy cattle here as well. It rains pretty much constantly in this part of England. We're just in the shadow of the Welsh mountains, and as the weather comes across the Atlantic, it all kind of dumps on Shropshire, so which is the county that we're in. So yeah, it's a good part of the world to farm in many ways, but frustrating and a bit gloomy in other ways.
I know the feeling living in West Michigan. We have that, especially in the wintertime. It's pretty gloomy, so I can feel your pain there.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about your background. You are from a farming background, but not necessarily what you planned on going into for your career, correct?
Yeah, that's right. I grew up on the farm where I'm sat today, but through my teenage years, I spent most of my time plotting how I was going to escape the farm and go and see the world and get to the big city, which I did. I went away to university and then worked in London for 5 years. But over that time, gradually got more interested in the family business broadly, and I guess more specifically in farming, and then also one of the jobs that I did during that time was working as a technology consultant. So during that time, I got more interested in how technology was transforming other sectors. And then I guess in my late 20s decided that I wanted to come back into the family business, and came back in, and and I guess the immediate thing that struck me was how technology might have transformed other sectors, but really farming was pretty similar to how it had always been. And I'm the fourth generation on my farm in the Midlands, but really a lot of the things that we do, the way that we take a decision on, we're going to fertilize this field or we're going to apply a herbicide to this field, we do those things in exactly the same way as we did 3 generations ago. It's the same as my great grandfather in the 1940s farming the same land. So I came back into the business, wanted to do things differently, and I suppose part of that was driven by seeing that I still don't really see a route for me to carry on in exactly the same way as my father and my grandfather have, which is sort of keep your head down, work hard, focus on being operationally efficient, and the living will take care of itself. I think those days have gone in the UK, and they won't return. So then the question becomes, how do you keep a business like this going, and what are the options that you have in front of you? So, it's been 13 years now since I came back into the business, and tried a few bits. Some of those things have worked, and some of those things haven't worked. But as you say, it hasn't lacked for excitement, Paul. Let's put it like that.
That's a big part of life, isn't it?
Yeah, I hope so.
You keep saying family business, and that was one thing I appreciated about the conversations that we had in Brazil is you have a mindset of investing and growing a family business, not necessarily just looking at it as a farm. So could you speak to that a little bit more of what that looked like when you were growing up, and then now what it looks like today, what that means to you, creating a family and growing a family business?
Yeah, I don't know where that mindset came from, but I think primarily it was spending time working away from the farm. And as I said, I did management consultancy for a bit, but I also did a few other things and worked in different types of businesses over the course of the 5 years. And I immediately, when I came back to the farm, to the family business, saw it as potentially more than just a farm. And I guess from the outset, I wasn't necessarily interested in the job of being a farmer. I wasn't looking to fill my days exclusively with farming activity. Part of that was that I didn't necessarily think that was me using my abilities that wasn't what's referred to sometimes as your zone of genius. I don't think that necessarily was mine. I saw that my dad was more naturally gifted in that area, but also a lot of my friends who were working on farms, they were just better at it than me. And so that was part of it. But also part of it was I saw that if I was, in inverted commas, just a farmer, it was going to be a real struggle to actually make a living. And so there were bits that I loved about immersing myself in just doing the work of being a farmer. But it always felt a little bit self-indulgent. I don't know if that's the right way to describe it, but it always felt like, okay, you're having a good time here, but are you actually growing? Are you making this business better? Is this business going to be better in 12 months' time than it is today because of the activities that you are doing? And I could never really answer that question in the affirmative. I always thought that we had to find ways to keep the business growing, and I couldn't see that was logical with the UK farming environment as it is from just doing more farming. So I immediately forced myself to think more broadly. But yeah, it was a mindset I always had that it was a business that happened to be engaged in the activity of farming rather than a farm. And it was a thought that was sort of further crystallized by a conversation I had in Brazil, and the guy's name is escaping me now. But Sally's husband, who is a Brazilian, who's a New Zealander who has set up a New Zealand system milk business in Brazil over the last 25 years and made a real success out of selling premium milk into a market that really didn't exist before he started doing it. And one of the things he said in his presentation, and I spoke to him afterwards, was everything is a choice. You have a farm that has been handed down through the generations, and that farm has a value. But you are still choosing, you are actively choosing to keep those dollars or those pounds invested in those assets. And you are saying, this is the best home for those assets. You could be doing something else. No one's forcing you to stay on that particular farm in that particular part of the world doing the activities that you are currently doing. You could sell those things and or do different activities. You could reinvest those dollars in something else, and that is, I think, a really interesting mindset, and it chimed a lot with the way that I was thinking. And so, yeah, I always thought from the start that the farm was what it was in 2011 when I came into it, but it could be a lot more than that. And they were all choices. No one was forcing me to spend my career doing exactly the same things as my father had done and my grandfather had done. And that's logical because the opportunity changes. The world looks different to what it did in 1990, and it looks different to what it did in 1970. So you probably should be doing different things. You should be constantly analyzing what is the opportunity that is in front of you today, and then trying to maximize that opportunity. And that, I think, is something that is particularly difficult, perhaps, on farms when there is so much wrapped up in tradition and the continuation of a way of doing things. But an interesting question I often ask myself is, if my great-grandfather were presented with the situation that I have today, what would he do? He was incredibly entrepreneurial and took a lot of risk and moved his family several hundred miles to a new area to go and farm, saw an opportunity in establishing himself as an arable farmer, and this was in the sort of around the time of the Second World War in the UK. The opportunities were there were a particular set of opportunities at that point, and he took significant risk to go and try and capture those opportunities. And if he was sat on this farm today with the world as it is in 2024, what would he do? And I think that's an interesting question, and I just always approached it with that mindset of it's a choice. You should choose to actively invest your time and your money in the opportunities that you have in front of you, not the opportunities that existed a few decades previously.
Yeah, those are some great points, great thoughts to think a little more deeply about for everyone's business. We'll come back to what you touched on with making a choice, and also the technology aspect of your career a little bit later in the episode here. Before we do that, could you talk a little bit about I know we had talked in Brazil and some of the other podcasts that I've listened to you on, you had talked about really utilizing the farm and looking at that more of a long-term investment and driving cash flow from utilizing the equity from your farm business to invest in areas with higher cash flow that allows you to think longer term about your farm. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so absolutely. So this is a strategy that I guess emerged about 8 or 9 years ago, I suppose. And it's all very aligned with what I've said to date around the mindset of where you invest your time, where you invest your money. There are, I suppose, when you're fortunate enough to own a farm, I suppose there are two distinct roles that you have. One is as a landowner, and the other is as a farmer. Again, you're choosing to be a landowner. You're choosing to keep that money invested in land, and you are choosing to be a farmer. Actively invest further dollars, if you like, in the activity of farming, in buying machinery, in buying seed, in buying inputs to go and carry out the activity of farming. It was pretty clear to me then. It remains clear to me today, and this is backed up by, if anyone's watched Clarkson's Farm, and I know some people in North America have. The activity of farming in the UK returns almost nothing. If you're breaking even, you're kind of pretty happy. It is not an activity that you do for financial reasons. You do it for other reasons. What we do have, though, is a land asset, good quality farmland, with consistent and pretty mild weather conditions that enable a high value around that asset. It's also, of course, it's a heavily populated island nation, where in fact the amount of available farmland is probably shrinking as cities expand. So it's an asset that has increased in value over time. So on the one hand, you've got an asset value that's slowly increasing. On the other hand, you've got this activity of farming, which is not necessarily making any money. So the logical thing is, the rational thing is, it's the Warren Buffett saying of, if you see people behaving irrationally, you should take advantage of that. Well, we've decided in our family not to do that. We've continued to engage in the slightly irrational activity of actively farming the land ourselves, when probably the most rational thing to do would be to either sell the land or to at least hold on to the land and get someone else to engage in the irrational activity of actually doing the farming. We've chosen not to do that. But what we have tried to do is find ways that we can continue to farm that land in a way that doesn't place pressure on cash flows. Because the farm business wasn't making a huge amount of money, we were constantly under pressure on cash flows. And so then we were having to take short-term decisions to optimize profitability, which might be around the intensity with which you farm the land. It might be around particular cropping decisions. And those have consequences in terms of long-term soil health or environmental consequences. And we wanted to try and get away from that. So how did you square the circle? So the strategy that we landed upon was to use the land asset as security to then go and raise an amount of debt, hopefully not too much and always very carefully managed, to then go and invest in other things. And what those other things were took some time to establish. But what we eventually landed on was other operating businesses. And you establish, a particular size of business that you can go and acquire. Because the other opportunity that we have in the UK is there are lots and lots of, and I mean thousands, of very good cash-generating businesses, not in farming, in all sorts of other sectors, where an individual or a pair of business partners have established a business, in a particular trade, built a bit of a team, grown it, but taken it to a certain point where they're either retiring or they've got bored or they want to move on. There's no succession plan, and lots of these businesses just get shut down. There's no reason. they're looking for an acquirer. And so as we started to look at this, as I say, there are thousands of them out there, and we decided that was a good use of capital for us to go and acquire other non-farming businesses that then can grow. The revenue line can increase each year. You have a more defensible margin, and over time, that turns into a potentially a very successful investment. So the story of what we've done there is, and I think we haven't done everything perfectly, and I think we've learned a lot of lessons along the way. Is we did the first one 7 years ago, and we're now looking to do the second one. The first business we bought was a manufacturing business. It's about an hour away from the farm on the edge of Birmingham, big industrial city, and it makes steel partitions. For warehouses and factories and things, and it had been going for 25 years, exactly as I describe. Two owners. Probably for the last 10 years of their ownership, it had been in cruise control, really. They hadn't really been pushing it. It had all sorts of growth potential, and they were just going to shut it down. So we came to an agreement. I think we took on more debt than we needed to in that first one, and that's something that we've learned from the second one. But we acquired it. I set up a partnership with my cousin, and I need to say at this point that the success of it has been much more down to him than to me. He's been a very good operator in that business, and he's been pretty hands-on in operating that business. But it now, when we took it on, it was doing about half the profit of the farm. But if you like, we'd immediately grown the profitability of the group of businesses or the family business by 50%. But now that business makes more money than the farm. And the impact for the farm is that we've grown. We've obviously grown the profitability of the family business. We have a reliable source of income coming from off the farm that is then taking the pressure off the decisions that we take day to day on managing the cash flow of the farm, so that we can think more long term and perhaps do something, take on particular soil management approaches, for example, that might in that particular year be less profitable, but are probably a better thing to do for the long-term health of the asset, the long-term health of the farm. And if this strategy works, which it looks as though it is at the moment, it will in the long term enable us to maintain the farm, because we think it's a nice place to be, and because it's been for all sorts of irrational and emotional reasons. It's been part of the family for ages, and all of those sorts of things. But take decisions that are not necessarily driven by cash flows, because actually the cash flow requirements of the family and of the business are being met elsewhere. And so that's been successful, that first acquisition, and now we're taking perhaps a bit more of a group approach, and we're going to try and add further acquisitions onto that, and that is probably the primary way that I see us growing the family business over the next over the foreseeable, really. And just to finish off on that, I suppose the two key characteristics of, in inverted commas, a normal business are that you have a revenue line, and so I'm talking about the manufacturing business here. You have a revenue line that you, with some ambition and with some good operations, you can grow, and you can grow it through better focus on sales, account management, marketing, maybe some product development, those sorts of things. And you also have a fairly defensible margin, and you can discuss that with your customers. And you can, if you need to, you can put up prices. And there's an element that the market will stand and that it won't stand, but you have some flexibility on that. And those are all things that, of course, farmers can't do. You can grow your revenue line, of course, but it's very expensive to do that.
It's usually by adding another unit, right?
It's adding another unit. And does it actually compete?
And if that's not profitable, then
is it profit? It might be revenue,
right,
but is it profit? And you, of course, can't. You don't have a defensible margin that you can dictate. You can't put up your prices one year, and you can't say, unless you are selling a premium product direct to a customer, and you maybe have some flexibility there, but even so, it's pretty tough, and so rather than being a victim to fortune and kind of oscillating up and down based on what the market that is entirely out of your control and the weather that is entirely out of control dictates, why not do something that is a bit more proactive that enables you to grow a long-term future for the family business? A long answer, but that's kind of how we got to that point. As of today, I'm pretty pleased with where we are.
Do you see long term, as you continue to invest in other businesses, that you and your family will take a very active role, or do you plan on setting up more of a management team where you're overseeing things, but not necessarily in the day-to-day operations, maybe as a CEO or COO?
Yeah, I will try not to get into the day-to-day operations. I mean, the way it's worked out in the first instance with my cousin, this is always a constant debate. My cousin has really immersed himself in the day-to-day operations, and the business has strongly benefited from that. And as we do the next one, partially because of that, I'm not going to do the next one with my cousin, and that's because he has sort of hit his limit. He's kind of gone, well, I'm pretty busy actually, and I'm also quite happy, and I can see the business continuing to grow, and so I've said, okay, well that's great. There's no reason to blow that up. You carry on, but I'm going to find some other partners to do this next one with, and I think my strengths, it all comes back to what are your personal strengths and what are you personally going to bring. If you're the sort of person who is a real detail in the weeds operator, then play to those strengths. But that's not me. I am more about a bigger picture and a vision and trying to grow things and getting people on board as a team who want to grow things together. And so I'm going to try and keep myself out of the day-to-day operations as much as possible, so that I can always be focused on the next thing. Because that's, I suppose, always my fear is, the more you immerse yourself in the particular operational details of this particular business, the more you limit your horizons around, okay, what could this become? And I've always had the view that a farm can be a platform for you to engage in almost whatever you want to engage in. It can enable some of that stability to that sort of core stability in the background to enable you to go and try new things and turn it into whatever you want to turn it into. And the limits in many ways are your imagination and your ability to get other people on the journey with you. And so, at the moment, I see no limits really in what the farm or the family business rather could become. And I'm really excited about the opportunities that we're looking at here. And as the different types of businesses that we're looking at, you sort of think, oh, that, could be interesting and grow in that particular direction, or it could be interesting and grow in another direction. I know this is something you've sort of started looking at as well, and it's
Yep.
There are all sorts of amazing and fascinating businesses out there, aren't there? and so I'm trying not to limit myself too much in terms of what we could potentially achieve in the future.
What are some of the resources that you've used? I know you've talked, I think we had talked in Brazil, you had mentioned something about Strategic Coach. You've had some other education that you've been involved with. You're on Nuffield right now. What are some of those tools that you've used in your history growing in your career, and how have those really impacted you?
So yes, definitely Strategic Coach, which is something that I've done for 7 years, I think. And really the primary, there's lots of small things I've got out of that, but I think the big thing has been around this concept of the self-managing company, which is the idea that it's kind of the philosophy that I just espoused to you, which is it is if you can get a team in place that deal with all of the day-to-day management of your business, that then frees you up to think bigger, to look at the next horizon, and to work out where the future opportunities are. And that, not everything that I've tried off Strategic Coach has worked, but that has really worked. And really, so when I started Strategic Coach, I was 100% fully hands-on on the farm. I was driving the tractors. I was working out day to day what people were going to be doing. I was, in charge of the cropping and walking the crops, and got livestock as well. I was hands-on and doing all of that stuff. But of course, then that, and then over the course of the 7 years, I'm now not involved in the day-to-day of the farm at all. I still come onto the farm and I'm physically present, but I am providing leadership around, okay, what's the next opportunity? Where do we see the growth of this business? And then also, what are the other sectors, the other investments, the other businesses that we're going to get involved with? And all of those hours that I was spending day to day on the farm, I am now not spending on the farm, and they are free for me to think about the bigger picture. And so that's been great. Other things I have tried. So particularly interested in technology. I spent a couple of years doing Abundance 360, which is with Peter Diamandis, based in LA, which is looking at future technologies very broadly across a number of different sectors. What are the big tech trends that are coming into the world, and how can you take advantage of those? Definitely met some really interesting people on that. Definitely learned a lot. The stuff that really stays with you is the mindset stuff, I think, and it is about getting excited about the opportunities that are in front of you rather than scared, and thinking with an abundance mindset rather than a scarcity mindset. There's specific industry specific stuff that you might pick up, but it's more the mindsets, I think. And I think that has carried on across other things I've done as well. I mean, so then I've done a few bits on buying companies. So I did these are both UK specific things, but I did a short course with something called the Harbour Club, which is run by somebody called Jeremy Harbour, which is around buying businesses, different approaches for doing deals, different sourcing deals and things like that. There's a number of there's lots of people who do things like this. There's another one in the UK called Jonathan J. Again, you learn some specific things, but probably the biggest thing you learn is the mindset. And the biggest mindset I learned from those courses was the world is full of opportunities. You could be in any business, and there are people who are desperate to sell to you because they are looking for a way out. So you can come and you can solve their problems, and they can solve your problems. And if you just attune your antennae so that you're picking up those opportunities, then other things will then fall into place. And so that, what I'm always seeking, I suppose, is that moment where a concept just lands and you can immediately see a bigger future for yourself, and there's that sense of excitement of, oh, I hadn't seen that avenue. I hadn't seen that there was another way of spending my professional career. There was another opportunity that was out there, and all of those different things that I've invested time and money in have all at different points given me that sense of, oh, there could be something bigger here. And the Nuffield has been another example of that. You're not quite sure, or often I'm not quite sure, what I'm going to get out of it in the short term, but it all adds. And often there is a moment that something clicks into place, and perhaps that thing wouldn't have clicked into place if you hadn't done, the previous things that you'd done. So there's a bit of blind stumbling around, frankly, Paul. But you're looking for those moments of clarity, and they're the exciting bit about this whole journey.
When you have that moment of clarity, or you have that paradigm shift, and your eyes are open to the opportunities that are in front of you, I know one thing that I struggle with seeing that now is understanding which opportunity to pursue. Because as you said, once the blinders come off, you see so many opportunities, but you don't have time to pursue them all. So how do you go about yourself deciding which ones to pursue? So
this is where I think it's really important to have a business partner who is different to you in terms of their approach, and having another really useful book that I have read and something that we're starting to implement is a book called Traction by someone called Gino Wickman, and he talks about this. He has something called the Entrepreneur's Operating System, EOS. It's quite widely used now in a number of businesses. One of the things that he has is a concept of the visionary and the integrator, and they work in tandem at the top of a business, of an organization. And in many ways, I'm a classic visionary, which is lots of ideas, lots of energy around those ideas, not much or not enough organization and structure around, okay, what is the priority order? If you did all of these 15 things, Sam, do you think, what are your chances of success? And so that's when you need an integrator who is a detailed operations person whose job is not to say no to all these ideas, but it is to help you prioritize and say, yes to these two, and not yet to these other ones. Not that they're not going to happen. And I suppose where things have worked, I've found that counterbalance to my personality, who is the more detailed person, and they have, in essence, they have helped me to do that prioritization bit. But there is something in there as well around confidence and maintaining that confidence as you get older, and perhaps in particular maintaining that confidence when you take decisions and it doesn't always work out. And it's when you first sort of set off on this entrepreneurial journey, you're excited about all the options that you have in front of you, and you take those decisions confidently, and you trust your instinct. And I still think that's the right way to do it in most cases. But of course, over time, not all of those things work, and you get some bumps and bruises. It's been a constant question for me as I've traveled around on my Nuffield. How do I continue to maintain that entrepreneurial excitement about the future with a little bit more experience and perhaps a little bit less naivety? And I don't want to become more cautious and go into my shell. But you have to learn from your experiences as you go, I think, and that's a constant question that I have to grapple with a bit.
I think all entrepreneurs at some point in their career really struggle with that, and you get to the point where you see so many things and you see opportunity everywhere. It's really hard to take it to the next step and hone that in.
But of course, aligned to what we've talked about so far, if you have a really good team, and you have that concept of a self-managing company, everyone's completely aligned. They know what their role is and they know what your role is. It certainly takes some of those limiters off. And, I have, wanted to be a farmer and wanted to run a farming business, but also seen opportunities in technology businesses and also seen opportunities in manufacturing businesses. And by being very, very strict around where I spend my time and what is it that I am good at, I've managed to be involved simultaneously in multiple projects. And one of the, we'll come on to talk about my experiences running a technology startup called Small Robot Company, which, and to spoil the punchline, ultimately Small Robot Company ended up failing, and failing in the sort of the pure financial terms. Although many things were a success, we had to liquidate the company at the start of this year, 2024. Whilst that was happening, because I had been involved in this manufacturing business, some other things around the farm, and a few different ventures were happening. They sort of, taking the portfolio approach, actually in the months that Small Robot Company was failing, the net worth of the group, the revenues of the group, the success metrics taken as a whole were continuing to trend upwards, even though one of those things was ending in failure. And so it comes down to, can you surround yourself with people who are more capable and more competent than you are? And in my case, that's very easy to find those people who are more capable and more competent. But then, can you get them engaged and excited about building something with you that is exciting for them personally, and I've managed to do that on a few occasions, and that has meant that it allows some things to not work because actually you've got people who are really invested in the detail of these other projects and will continue to grow those things, whether I am there or I'm not there. The thing that excites me about the entrepreneurial journey is it is one of the most uniquely human things, I think, that you can do. It's one of the things that defines us as human beings, is that we can get together around an idea, a concept that is not necessarily a physical thing. It is, a company is not a physical thing. It is an idea that we collectively get together and work on. And that can be self-generating in terms of energy and forward momentum. And there's nothing more exciting for me than seeing things gather their own momentum and people starting to take decisions autonomously without your involvement, and seeing things start to get their own steam and their own momentum, and being able to take a step back and see it see it sort of just happen, if you like.
That's a great way to describe human psychology, isn't it?
Yeah, it's great. It's wonderful. It's wonderful when it works, but it's equally painful when it doesn't work, I suppose.
It is, but the way you've set it up really is a great risk mitigation strategy to allow things to have the freedom and flexibility to try those things that might not work and not be afraid of it, right?
Yeah.
I think that's the power of the system that you've set up.
Yes. Another, I don't know, I can't remember any particular texts, but I started to get interested at the same time as setting up this whole strategy around using the farmland as security to then go and invest in other businesses. I was reading about just various texts on portfolio management and sort of theory around how do you set up a good portfolio, and this concept of an all-weather portfolio, regardless of what happens to the price of oil or the price of wheat, you have a portfolio that could work. And a very simple tool that I developed for myself to help to aid my thinking was a simple risk versus reward grid where you have 4 squares: high risk, low risk, high return, low return, and then I plotted out all of the activities that we were engaged with at the time on the farm, and a few other things like there's a business park on the farm and things like that. Where were we investing time and money? What was high risk and what was low risk, and what was high return and what was low return? And what it established was that most of our activity was high risk and low return, which is the worst place to be, which was arable farming. It was invest all of your money up front in a market that you don't have any control over, when you don't know the amount of the thing that you're going to produce and you don't know the price that you're going to sell it at. And yes, there are things you can do to mitigate some of that price risk. But it was then, okay, well, how do we, if this was a portfolio, which it is, of assets that we're going to invest against, how would we ideally spread that risk? And you want some things in low risk and low return, which for us, I guess, is farmland. But you also want some things in high risk and high return, and you want some things in the middle as well. And in the middle was this manufacturing business, which is, I guess, medium risk, and the risk is really, it's a new industry for us. It's not that risky in terms of, is it going to disappear? I mean, not really. It's going to be around for another 25 years, and the returns are medium to medium high. But then the sort of high risk and high return part of the portfolio that we then started to look at and did a bit of investing in was around venture capital and technology startups. There's a good book actually around the Yale Endowment Fund. And the name escapes me. There's a guy who ran the Yale Endowment Fund for years, and he talks about how he split the investments, spread the risk across different asset types and different returns. And a portion of that, maybe it's 2 or 3%, is in venture capital. It's in the high risk stuff. And so we did an element of that, and then that thinking was what eventually led me towards technology for farming, which was the small robot company work.
I love that example of the diagram. That's something I'm definitely going to sit down at some point this week and go through. I think that's a great exercise that I can do. Appreciate that. I hope you enjoyed the first part of the interview that I had with Sam Watson-Jones. Tune in next week as we cover the second part of his story about the small robot company and his journey in an ag tech startup. As always, if you found value in this episode, please like, subscribe, and share this episode with somebody that you know that can get value out of it as well. And until next week, I'm Paul Windemaller, and this has been the AgCulture Podcast.